This is going to be a fantastic couple of days, and I am really privileged to be kicking this off because I like nothing better than shifting a few paradigms and shaking things up a little bit, as you know. And there's probably nothing that's been shook up more than biological science in the last couple of years. Just in case you don't know who we are, could we dim the lights just a little bit, please? These are the three websites we have, and these are the three divisions of our company that we do. We have What Doctors Don't Tell You, Now Living the Field, which grew out of my book, The Field. I had so many people ask me, how do I live this field, that I figured, well, I better go out and research this. So me and my team, including Brian and many others, we've spent 4 years looking at all the different ways that people can try to live in unity. And that's what that course is all about which more later. And now we have the Intention Experiment site, and that, as you possibly know, is my latest project. And it's been the thing, as Brian says, it's been taking me around the world. So that is our monthly newsletter. That is the book, The Field, and this is the Intention Experiment in the UK and the US, and about which more later too. That is not only a book, it's an ongoing series of experiments, which is, I hope, pushing the paradigm out and demonstrating the power of intention and what we can do with it. And that was really why the book started. I just was curious, being the kind of foot on the ground person that I am, is, okay, it's all very well talking about mind over matter and intention, but what the heck can you do with it? And that's really what we're trying to do, and that's what I'll be telling you about later. But now I want to talk to you a little bit about our view of science and what the paradigm currently is. When I was a kid growing up in America in the 50s and 60s, we had a saying, better living through chemistry. And that pretty much was a catchphrase that symbolized our view of science and technology. We thought we were pretty smart. We thought if we took things and we cut them into tiny little pieces, we could understand the whole. And that's pretty much been the direction of science in every regard since then. Understand by dissection, go down to the tiniest bit. And that's what they did. And what they thought the tiniest bit was chemistry. That things operated completely through chemistry, that biology in a sense is chemistry, that all things operate according to chemistry, that chemistry defines the language of the cell, that everything, joy, all of our activities, all of our understanding, all of our human emotions have to do with chemistry, chemical collision, chemistry. By the way, I don't know if you've ever seen Charlotte's Web, some pig, but I saw that picture and I thought of her, and I thought of that wonderful book. But everything we think about with chemistry and biology is reduced to this kind of odd chemical reaction. And they believe and this is what biology has talked to us about up until now, that this defines how we work. And I want to show you a little bit about how stupid this is. There's a thing in chemistry and biology called the lock and key reaction, which is how molecules are supposed to talk to each other. They talk to each other by bumping into each other in a cell. Now just imagine the average cell. The average cell is a little bit like a swimming pool. And those molecules are a little bit like two tennis balls. And according to our current biological paradigm, those two tennis balls will find each other in the cell, and by accidentally colliding into each other, they will have a lock and key situation. One key will fit into the other lock, and that will initiate all of the millions of activities that go on in the average human body at every second. That kind of collision, that happenstance, is supposed to be responsible for everything we are, everything we do, reduced down to a collision. We also believe that the protein is our fundamental, sort of more or less the fundamental engineer in the body. That protein runs so many things. And of course, that the big master builder is our genes. The big master builder is DNA. The other thing, the other paradigm that more or less defines us are the ideas and the thinkings of Charles Darwin. They, with Isaac Newton, more or less form the paradigm of our world. And according to the neo-Darwinists, we are more or less a genetic mistake. We are the sort of sum of our genes, which sort of run through us like Chicago thugs, more or less driving us to survive. And that paradigm is one more or less of a predatory nature, of eat or be eaten, zero-sum game, win or lose. And that more or less defines our world. We think of ourselves, and we have created our world based on this paradigm of only the strong survive, of genetic dominance. We think of ourselves and our world completely in terms of competition. Another aspect of our current biology, that's Homer Simpson, by the way, and a man of very little brain. But we think of brain, and brain has been defined for us as being locked inside the skull. That's according to biology now. We think of the brain and of all mind as being just locked in here. And the same thing with our emotions, that our emotions are located actually in precise addresses. And that's more or less what most biologists will tell you, is that if you have an emotion, it's because it occurs in a certain part of your brain. And that all mind and emotions are completely, again, locked in here in a series of electrical discharges, all having to do with what's going on in the brain. When something occurs to something else, according to our Newtonian paradigm, which describes a very well-behaved universe of separate objects operating according to fixed laws in time and space, if you want to influence something else, you got to do something physical to it. You got to freeze it, burn it, drop it, or give it a good swift kick. But you got to do something physical to something else to affect it. And the same thing with healing. You got to do something physical. Our entire healing paradigm is based on the idea of chemical manipulation, better living through chemistry. That we can take a drug and we can give it to a body, and it will have a local effect on that body. It can precisely target what it's meant to achieve. Or we think of the body as just being something that's broken, and we can mend it. Our information input, according to this paradigm, is that we just receive it from the senses. That's all that current biology understands and believes. That's the only way we get information. And of course, our heart is just one of those little muscles in the body. It happens to be a pretty central engine, but it's just a pump. It's just a physical entity that pumps blood and nourishment around the body. Just a physical entity. And in terms of our life experience, it's all contained up here. All contained inside of our skull, according to the current paradigm. So this in its totality describes a paradigm of body as machine. If it's broke, it gets fixed. It gets fixed through chemistry, it gets physically, but it's a machine. And we understand it and we attempt to heal it as a machine. In terms of our larger impact on our interaction with our world, we understand our world paradigm as life being predatory. Life is competition. That is everything that we've understood in biology up until now. Life in nature is competitive. Life inside our body is competitive. All of life is all about being separate, being discrete, being individual. A pretty gruesome and bleak image, don't you think? The other thing that we're told is that time and space are finite constants. they're things we can rely on. We understand time as a forward arrow between cradle and grave. Something finite, a constant, doesn't change. Same thing with space. We understand ourselves in relation to the rest of the world in space as being something other and separate. But here's a few things that that paradigm doesn't really answer. If everything's about chemistry and proteins, how does a cell know to grow and when? How can a single cell turn into a human being? How does one cell know to be a part of your arm and not your leg? How do these chemicals really find each other in the time they're supposed to? I mean, things happen instantaneously in the body. How do all those collisions go on all at once? How come people get information outside of their senses? Really reliable stuff. How come all these things? They don't fit that paradigm. Luckily, many of the people you're going to meet this weekend have spent their lives trying to answer those questions, and they've come up with some amazing answers. They've looked even at why distant healing works, why you can send thoughts from you to someone else and make that person better. The fact that that happened was what propelled me on the whole quest to research the field. Just the idea that spiritual healing works, that one person's thoughts, without even touching them, can make somebody better. A new chapter is unfolding now. A new biology is unfolding. And it demonstrates that we are not just chemistry. We are at our real essence, energy. And that we are not separate, but part of an energy field. That the world as it exists is not finished and finite and discrete, and full of finalized assemblages, but influenceable, and that we are influencing it at every moment, and that everything is connected and affected by everything at every moment. Fundamentally, we exist only in relationship. We exist within a giant field, and I know Rupert Sheldrake is going to be talking about morphogenetic fields and morphic fields. We exist in a field, and we are part of that field. Everything, the nethermost elements of our being, are just part of this field, part of this relationship. We also exist in an information feedback system. The 0-point field, that entity that I've written about now in these 2 books, is the center of this, the central matrix of this information field. It is, for anyone who hasn't heard about this before, just the energy dance that goes on between subatomic particles in the universe. All little subatomic particles trade energy just like a little game of tennis. They send energy back and forth constantly. And in that energy exchange, in less than the blink of an eye, a little virtual particle is created. And that little virtual particle is just a tiny little bit of energy. It's only half a watt's worth, not much to write home about. But if you add up all of these subatomic particles and this entire energy dance going on between all the subatomic particles and all the things in all the universe, you come up with an unfathomable amount of energy, all happening in empty space like some supercharged backdrop. Now, we at our essence are just a little bit of charge doing that kind of energy dance too. And we are part of that energy exchange. So there are 2 implications here. One, we are all connected, but also that we share information. And the scientists you're going to be hearing about today have come up with so much information to demonstrate that we are not in competition at our essence, but we understand and learn through a very complex information feedback system that grows The 0-point field is like a giant memory bank of information, of all the information that ever was, and that we understand and learn by a feedback system that goes on at every moment. It goes on at its essence by cooperation. We also are aware that instant connections occur. That's Alfred E. Newman. I don't know if any of you know Mad Magazine, but Condoleezza Rice has been compared to him a lot lately in America. And I like to think about non-locality as being a little bit like separated at birth. And these two they've been saying that these two are separated at birth. Non-locality is the instant connection that occurs between subatomic particles. And the amazing things that I discovered in my latest book, The Intention Experiment, is that these instant connections, as though it were twins separated at birth, who still retain an invisible connection between each other, no matter how far you take them apart. This kind of instantaneous connection occurs in the big world too, they are discovering. It occurs between molecules now, great big molecules. It occurs across the galaxy, in the field, even between people within the human body. We're finding non-locality everywhere, or entanglement. That's the most lovely word to describe it. We're finding that kind of instantaneous connection, which has nothing to do with lock and key, nothing to do with chemistry. It's an ongoing, instantaneous dialogue. We're also finding an enormous amount of evidence that mind seems to be interlinked with matter in some way. We think, therefore we affect. We think, therefore we affect. Many scientists now, many frontier physicists believe that it is evident, there is evidence now to suggest that consciousness is a co-creator, that we are co-creating at every instant. This is not only evident in so many of the studies that I enumerated in the field, but many more studies now of mind over matter in very controlled laboratory conditions, demonstrating that mind has the ability to affect things outside of itself. We also are beginning to understand that we're not only not little discrete things that are separate, but that our energy systems are just part of a massive kind of ecosystem energy system, that we are affected by planetary energy. There's enormous evidence, and this isn't weird woo-woo stuff. This is the stuff of science now. This is the stuff, there is even a discipline called chronobiology or chronoastrobiology to demonstrate that we are profoundly affected by the sun and other planets, primarily the sun, and the sun's activity. When the sun is very noisy, and the sun is a very furious star, hurling things at us all the time. It's throwing solar flares and all kinds of things like that at us. And it affects our geomagnetic shield. And that in turn affects the two major engines of the body, the heart and the brain. And it also seems to affect our ability to tap into the field. We are connected to a larger energy system. We're all part of this whole. Scientists now looking into consciousness research are now beginning to understand, and even mainstream scientists now, that our definitions of time and space are way too constrained. That time and space as we know it is just a human construct. It's just an idea. I was fascinated to look at much information, looking at these consciousness studies, mind over matter studies for the Intention Experiment, to find that these experiments worked just as well in things out of time as they did in real time. So if there were REG experiments going on, those are those mechanical devices that are like a 21st century toss of a coin. If somebody was attempting to affect it and get more heads than tails, it would work just as well if you were 3,000 miles away as if you were sitting right in front of it. It would work just as well if you tried to send an intention to have it affected last week or 2 weeks from now as it did today. Time and space were irrelevant. I recounted in my book, The Intention Experiment, about this amazing study, Praying for Yesterday, that appeared in The Lancet with a doctor who wanted to discredit alternative medicine, an Israeli doctor. So he thought of the most outrageous study he could. He divided patients with a very serious illness, blood sepsis, into two, and he sent prayer to half of them. Now, probably to his horror, the people who were prayed for got better in every way. They left the hospital sooner. They were better in every way. But what he didn't count on was this occurring in the way he had set it up, because the patients were in the hospital between the years of 1992 to 94. The experiment was carried out in the year 2000, 6 to 8 years later. Now, he published it in The Lancet, and a lot of people said, this proves we can go back to change the past. But what people are finding, and there are many scientists like Dean Radin and many others like this, doing much, much research into what they call retro-intention, is that it's not that we go back and change the past, but that our future is constantly affecting the present as it unfolds. Our future, our present, another way of saying that is our present is contingent upon future conditions. In other words, the past and the present are shaking hands at every moment. We are much more embraced by a reality that is like one giant here and one ever-present now. And that is the truer the reality. I think it was last year, mainstream scientists even had a conference on the idea of time, because they recognized that their science demonstrates that time as we understand it is way too constrained. In future, we will be blasting the paradigm in all kinds of ways, in moving away from time as an arrow. We'll understand time as much more as a totality. In terms of our bodies, what we are beginning to understand is that the body is entirely decentralized. That this idea of the engine being up here, the master builder being here and in DNA is not true. It's much more complex. We're finding that emotions are distributed throughout the nervous system and that memory has no precise address. We're finding out even that very serious illnesses like cancer can be cured by finding out the emotional trauma that perhaps caused it. One of the most impressive bits of work that are going on in cancer treatment today is in Germany with a thing called new medicine. It was developed by a man called Reichgerd Hammer. And Hammer, this is how disgraceful this is. Hammer, who has one of the most successful treatments of cancer in Germany, is in prison right now. That's what goes on with innovators in this area. That's what goes on. Hammer came up with the idea, and we've even had cancer conferences about this and about his work because it is so successful. He discovered that patients, over and over, patients with cancer have suffered some sort of trauma, emotional trauma. So then he began trying to track it and track the trauma and track the cancer, and he found all kinds of correlations. So what his new medicine practitioners are now doing is treating the trauma, and they get rid of the cancer. They get rid of the cancer without surgery, without chemo, without anything, by dealing with the emotional trauma. An organization called People Against Cancer in Germany, there's a guy called Lothar Hirneis. If any of you have been to our alternative cancer conferences, you've met him. Lothar and his counterpart, Frank Wiewel in the States, are probably the most knowledgeable people about alternative cancer practices anywhere in the world. And they have found that the new medicine treatments are possibly the most effective of any cancer treatment, treating the emotion. What does that say about our biological paradigm? Doesn't that throw it into a cocked hat? What we're beginning to understand is that there is no such thing as body and mind. Mind is body is mind. The two are not only interlinked, the two are the same. The two are the same. Your body is your mind and beyond. We're also understanding that our idea of perception, that perception and emotion are globally distributed. We're understanding a global interpretation of the body. There were glimmers of this back in the 60s when some people like Karl Pribram were doing their research. Remember, if you've read The Field, those awful experiments that Pribram worked with Lasky on with those rats, where he tried to find where memory was. So they started burning bits of rats' brains with curling irons. I mean, this is science at its most elemental and sometimes disgusting. They started chopping up these rats' brains and cutting away more and more. They were rats who had been trained to do a certain run. And they were really frustrated, these scientists, because they took away brains. They even sausage ground their brains and put them back in there. And the poor rats were really disabled in terms of mechanics. They were hobbling along and they were crippled, but they always remembered the run. Memory was not in their brains. Memory was not in their brains. And there are many, many studies like this demonstrating something larger than what we've understood about memory and emotion. We also now have got to the understanding that each molecule has its own frequency, has its own little song. The late, great Jacques Benveniste first discovered this with his work demonstrating that each molecule has a precise frequency, and that when he was able to record that frequency, he could initiate a chemical reaction without the actual substance being there. The other molecule just needed to hear the frequency, and it would react. This was remarkable because it said below that chemical, there is a frequency that is really the driving force of the molecule. Fritz Popp also discovered the light coming out of that the master conductor was not simply the genetic code as we've always understood, but that there is light coming out of DNA. And so did Peter Garyev, who is a Russian, whose work has been quite remarkable. He's found that DNA is a resonant cavity. It's vibrating, and it's beaming out almost like a television transmitter. And that there is this layer below what we have understood up until now that is about frequency, and that these frequencies are individual, they're highly targeted, and they can be addressed when we're trying to heal. All of this information can be tapped into when we are trying to heal, when we are also trying to understand. We also now realize that emotion isn't locked into our brains, but occurs in every cell. The people you're going to be hearing about this weekend, Joyce Hawkes, Todd Overkaitis, Bruce Lipton, will be talking about the cell and the emotion in the cells and the decentralized nature of the cell. Candace Pert came up with a fascinating neuropeptide theory, that she discovered that neuropeptides, information that occurs all through the nervous system and is produced by the immune system. This is a network of emotional information that occurs throughout the body. She found it in the immune systems, in the endocrine systems, in the nervous system. That emotion, in her view, is globally distributed. You have emotions in your liver. You have your emotions in your pancreas. You have emotions in your gut. I don't need to have to tell you about that, I'm sure. You feel things in your gut. And that these neuropeptides, in her view, are the interface between what we characterize as mind, what we characterize as body. But from here you can understand that mind, if emotion is present in every cell, emotion and mind is body. We're now understanding that the gut, which has been called the second brain by many people, actually does have a nervous system itself, that they're discovering serotonin, a very, very powerful mood regulator in the body, in the gut. It's been very interesting, too, the work of Dean Radin about gut hunches. You know, we use that phrase. We use a lot of terminology that actually has some basis in fact. He's been doing some studies measuring the gut and what happens in the gut when people have experiences of ESP. And he's finding that there is activity and reaction between people during intention, during ESP, in the gut as well. There's a kind of synchronicity that's going on in the gut. So there is some evidence to demonstrate that the so-called gut hunch is correct. We're also finding that there is cellular memory, that emotion remains in the cell. And as I mentioned, trauma gets imprinted as cancer. But this is not bad, this is now good, because by understanding this, we're also understanding about healing at the cellular level, which Joyce Hawkes is going to be talking about this weekend. Oops. We now have indisputable evidence that the mind extends beyond the brain, and that what we understood of mind really has to be discarded for a much more elastic view of mind as not even being just confined within our bodies, but something that reaches out. And Rupert Sheldrake will be talking about that a lot this weekend. We know now, because we've measured it, that a thought is a physical energy, an actual something. I always talk about this as a thought is a thing that affects other things. A thought is something that is actually tangible. They've measured it with studies of healers and people undergoing mind over matter, and they've found that healers have actually, when holding on to water, have changed the oxygen and hydrogen bonds of water. They've made some sort of alteration. Gary Schwartz has done a lot of study demonstrating that when healers so-called run energy, there is a giant surge of magnetic energy surrounding them. Other people have demonstrated there's an electrical surge around healers. William Tiller has run experiments like this. Elmer Green has run experiments. His famous copper wall experiments have shown that when a healer sends healing, there's this huge surge of electrical energy. It's actually something we can measure. Now, we don't think that healing is electromagnetic energy, because they've put healers in electromagnetic shields and they still have effects. But there is some sort of, it may be mediated, there may be an effect on electromagnetic energy. We don't completely understand it yet, but we know that we can measure some consequence from it in a physical way. We also know through so many studies of the body that thought is the body's most powerful instruction. Thought overrides so many things, and they've demonstrated in studies of athletes, for instance. When athletes are going through mental rehearsal, the body is a pretty remarkable thing, but it's also a little bit dumb. When they're doing these kinds of studies, they will have they can have skiers, for instance, thinking and rehearsing their runs. And the body, actually, the neurotransmitters and the information sent to the muscles of the body is exactly the same with the thought as it is when the skiers are actually conducting these downhill runs. The body has trouble distinguishing between thought and action, even thought and perception, thought and activity. My favorite study of all, looking at whether or not there's a difference between going to the gym and thinking about going to the gym. They had a group of people and sent half to the gym to work on their biceps. The other half were allowed to stay at home, sitting in their armchair, thinking about working on their biceps. And they discovered that the people who went to the gym increased their bicep size by 15%, but the people who stayed home and thought about it, or 30%. People who stayed home and thought about it increased their bicep size by 15%. So, you know, if you don't like going to the gym, you can just go home and think about it tonight, and you'll have half the effect. There are many studies like this, even studies of people in hypnosis being shown colored paintings and being wired up so that they could test their color receptors. When told they're looking at a black and white painting, the color receptors turn off, the black and white receptors turn on. Thought overrides actual perception. Thought is the strongest, most powerful instruction there is. We know now that actually mind affects the brain, not the other way around. There are some very, very interesting studies of monks and many other kinds of so-called master intenders demonstrating that when people work on focus with their thoughts, they actually change their brain. They enlarge certain portions. They become better transmitters, better receivers. The studies of Carl Pribram have been eye-opening for me and many, many others, because they've demonstrated that the brain is a bit like a master receiver transmitter, that it's more a transducer. It takes information in terms of, it sees out there in terms of frequencies, takes that information, does a little bit of transferring, and then produces its images. That's how you see in 3D, by the way. You know, if you really think about it, why should you see in 3D? You know, if you were watching this, watching a screen the way it's described, why do you see in 3D? But what they found is that thinking certain thoughts changes the brain. Meditation changes the brain in weeks. In weeks. They found that it actually increases not only the information input, but also its cortical thickness. It actually changes the structure, and it changes the kind of pathways between the intuitive part of the brain and the so-called analytical part of the brain. And so it creates bigger and better reception. We now know through the placebo effect that thoughts are one of the most powerful medicines we've got. Doctors like to poo-poo the placebo effect. You know, it's only a placebo. It's only a placebo. The placebo works 60 to 70% of the time. If there were any drug out there as good as the placebo, I would like to market it. There is nothing as good as the placebo effect. There have been so many remarkable studies, not only of drugs with placebo effects, but doctors now, many, many doctors. There was a study recently of the placebo effect, a book out, and the doctor who wrote it admitted that something like 60% of all doctors use placebos, because what they'll do is they'll put a little bit of active substance in something so they don't feel like a complete charlatan. And they'll give it to the patient because they know it's kind of a contract between them and the patient. If they all believe it's going to work, it works. And that's where I've come to in the position now after 18 years of doing What Doctors Don't Tell You. I still am broadly against conventional medicine and in favor of, and broadly in favor of alternative medicines, I should say. But I've come to the position now where when people call up and say, what should I do? I kind of say to them, do what you most believe in. Because even if it's the most powerful toxic chemotherapy, if you think it's going to work, it's the most powerful drug there is. Studies now have even shown, there was one remarkable study in Houston of arthritis patients. So this wasn't just about drugs, this was about an operation. They took half and they sent half onto the operating table and did an operation for arthritis. The other half, they just had a sham operation, which meant they just opened up the person and then closed them up, didn't do anything. After 3 years, the patients who were just given the sham operation, as well as the other patients, reported being completely free of pain. It carried on for 3 years. In fact, I think the people undergoing the sham operation were a little bit better because they didn't have the side effects of the operation. If anything is going to demonstrate it, it's going to be that thought is the most powerful medicine there is. If we were smart about it with biology, we would use our thoughts. And many of the people you're going to be seeing this weekend, and Peggy Dubrow and Eric Pearl are going to be talking about thoughts and using this kind of new kind of information to heal. We now know that healing can occur through intention. There are many systems now of alternative healing that use some form of thought or intention to heal and are successful. There are also many forms of healing now working with frequency that are successful. But the other thing that we understand, and that we'll be talking about this weekend, is that thought doesn't just affect the body of your own body. It also can affect the body of the receiver. There have been some remarkable studies. The Institute of Noetic Sciences carried out one called the so-called love study, where they actually wanted to quantify what happens to the body of the receiver when the sender is sending loving intention. And so they wired up each person in a bunch of pairs. And these were married couples, one of whom had cancer. So they wired up heart, brain, all kinds of things. They put them in 2 separate rooms with a monitor, a camera, trained on the person with cancer. And they asked the person, the other partner, the well partner, who was sitting in front of a monitor, to send healing intention every time an image of his spouse or her spouse popped up. And what they discovered is when the person was sending intention, all of their bodily systems began to synchronize or speak to each other in some way. Heart waves, brain waves, skin conduction, that's the circulatory, measuring circulation, respiration, all sorts of things began to start working in parallel. We have now evidence that so-called mind affects the body of the recipient. And of course, this is kind of a scary concept, because if our thoughts are affecting someone that profoundly, just with one little healing intention, imagine what you're doing at this very moment to all the people around you. We're going to talk a little bit about that in a few minutes when I share with you some of the interesting results we've got with our intention experiments so far. But they are liberating and also scary thoughts if we are affecting at every moment. We now know that our thoughts can heal others, and particularly when certain conditions are satisfied. We know that when we send intention, healing intention, that we have a better effect the more specific we are. We also know, we have some evidence, that negative thinking can actually make you ill. We now know, and we have some evidence, that healers work best when they are well in every way. When they are well in every way, that they have variable effects. Their intention depends on their system. We know, and we have some evidence, that healing between the sender and the recipient works best when there is a congruence of beliefs, when they're both believing the same thing, when their thoughts are kind of in tandem. And we have some evidence now that healing works best when there's some sort of empathetic bond. Wouldn't this be great if doctors understood this? That instead of seeing you for 5 minutes, they just came up and they held your hand. Wouldn't this be great if doctors understood that their atmosphere, their healing atmosphere in their waiting room is aiding a patient's healing or sickness? Wouldn't it be great if a doctor just understood that some sort of touch is not to be eschewed, but is something to be encouraged? We're now understanding, as I've been implying, that we're communicating with our environment at every moment. Fritz Albert Popp had remarkable studies and is carrying on now, understanding that all living things send out a tiny current of light. He calls them biophoton emissions, tiny current of light at every moment. But more than that, he's done a lot of studies with different living systems, different kinds of animals and plants, and found that this little two-way flow is going on at every moment in a synchronicitous fashion. He's had studies of fleas, for instance, and found that when one is sending out this light, the other one is, in effect, replying to it. These messages are being picked up and replied to. Even people like Cleve Baxter, the famous lie detector expert, who came up with the idea that plants read your thoughts, has been carrying on for 40 years studies of all kinds of living things, hooking them up, and finding that living things are responding to what he calls primary perception. It's, you know, like Yoda said, I feel a disturbance in the force. He's found that when there's a death in the environment, his plants react to it. When he has an evil thought about one of his plants, they react to it. Now, this is on a crude system. It's on a lie detector system. And Baxter has been ridiculed for 40 years. But work like Fritz Albert Popp or Russian physicist Konstantin Korotkov are proving him right in demonstrating this light conversation is going on at every moment. Karl Pribram has done studies demonstrating that that animals, he's done a lot of studies with human beings and animals, demonstrating that we're picking up particular frequencies when we are perceiving ordinary reality. And he has theorized that when we have things like ESP, et cetera, we pick up a larger bandwidth. We also are now understanding that, or beginning to understand, that the body is talked to in frequencies and waves, not images. And that there is information coming out that this central kind of information that we are picking up all the time is the frequency. There's even been some theories that a lot of our higher cognitive function isn't here at all, but really exists out there in the field. And that would be more consistent with some of the amazing results that are occurring in studies demonstrating that mind extends outside of the brain. And Rupert Sheldrake's going to be showing you some incredible examples of that. Following on from these ideas, you know, Fritz Popp once said to me, we're all candles. And this has resonated particularly with Eric Pearl, because Eric is an amazing character. He is a chiropractor who was gifted with this healing ability one day, and he'll tell you all about it. One day he started going near his patients in Los Angeles and trying to heal them, and they were healed before he touched them. And he found they were starting to bleed from their hands. All kinds of things were going on. And Eric interprets this, and Eric wants to be subjected to scientific study. He would like people to look at him and figure out what's going on with him. But he believes that he's reconnecting with the field, and that he is healing also at a cellular level through information, through reminding the body about light and information. He believes that's what's going on. And this is the remarkable thing about this kind of new healing that we're going to be looking at this weekend, is the idea that we can heal on a much deeper level through other means, through non-invasive means. And you'll be experiencing some of that this weekend with Joyce Hawkes and Peggy Dubrow and Eric Pearl. We're now realizing that we can use these signature frequencies that Benveniste discovered to diagnose illness. Popp is starting to do that. Todd Overkaitis is looking at that. That we can also manipulate these resonances, targeting certain disease cells and changing the frequency. Popp also looked at the idea of what frequencies what frequencies of other substances can help to revert a diseased cell to normal. And he looked at a patient with cancer, and he found that Iscador, mistletoe, was the substance that came closest with that particular person to turning her cells back to normal. So this is going to be the medicine of the future, looking at this aspect of biology, that we can manipulate, use, remind our bodies what are natural and healthy frequencies. And Todd is going to be telling you about his special laser technology that also uses this information, manipulates frequencies. So perhaps our phrase ought to be something like better living through frequency now, because the medicine of the future, and Peggy's going to be talking about this, is using certain balancing techniques and light resonance to remind the body, once again, of the correct frequency. And to understand that this information is really the key underlying information of the nervous system. And that's her whole approach that you'll be experiencing this weekend. What this adds up to is something very simple. I was fascinated by some work Rupert Sheldrake did in his, or information that he recounted in one of his books, and I'm sure he'll talk to you about this, about ants. I don't know if you've ever watched ants. I watched ants this summer. We were in Italy, and we were in a place that had lots of ants, and so if you left a crumb out, it was a problem. And I watched them in fascination. We left a crumb on the stairs of this villa. And when we came home, there was an enormous line from the stairs all the way up and all the way around through the kitchen and out the door. This incredible, incredible line. How did these ants know? And how did they all do this so beautifully and cooperatively? How did they get this information? The crumb was there. How did the last guy know that the first guy was picking up the crumb? It had to be something more than what we're told. And I think Rupert will tell you a lot more about that. He also recounts a fantastic study that one scientist did where he put a big plate in a great big anthill, a termite, I think it was a termite hill. And he found that the termites built a perfect structure on either side of the plate. So when you took the plate away, it was perfectly symmetrical. How did they know to do that? How did they know to do that in our current paradigm? It doesn't work, does it? Doesn't work. What they're discovering, and Bruce is going to be talking about this so much, is that nature is not, sure, we know about eating for survival, but nature nature in its totality, both without and within, is cooperative. Within the cell and in the whole society is cooperative in the main. And that our paradigm for how we work has to change. Why are we calling this weekend the biology of transformation? What's so transformative about this information? First of all, over the weekend, you're going to be understanding a new idea of self. You're going to be redefining what is self and what is not self. You're going to be redefining how you heal. You're going to be redefining how you interact with the world. You're going to be understanding that healing is not local. And that's one of the problems with drugs. That's why they can't get it right. They keep giving you a drug thinking they're targeting a certain part, but it hits everywhere because you can't localize like that. There's too much information and transfer in the body. They're finding that learning is not local. You don't just learn in your head. Perhaps memory isn't local. Perhaps influence isn't local. Perhaps none of what we understand about how we work is local, but that we are simply part of this larger whole. You'll be understanding that you are your world, that there is not a division between you, us, and them. I hope this weekend is going to give you a new view of possibility. And I want to, in that spirit, I want to tell you a little bit about what we've been finding with the intention experiments so far. When I started the intention experiments, I thought about saving the world. And I thought about saving cancer victims, and I thought about rescuing drowning people, and I thought about stopping Middle East problems, et cetera, et cetera. So when I first started looking at how to do these experiments, first of all, I had to have a science. First of all, and most importantly, I had to do something that was cheap, because it was going to cost a lot of money to set up these intention experiments on the website. And so happily and fortuitously, Dr. Gary Schwartz from the University of Arizona stood up to bat and said, I'll do it. I'll do the first ones. So then when we were discussing them, I said, okay, so what should we do? Let's save cancer victims, et cetera. And he said, okay, let's start with a leaf. And I went, a leaf? What? A leaf? What has the leaf got to do with anything? And how is this going to engage the world mind? Because what I decided to do was, in doing these experiments, was, I'm not a scientist, and I say that over and over again. The last experiment I did was in the 10th grade. It was with a frog dissection. I think that's a standard issue for high school. And the only reason I did it was because my partner, who was a guy, fainted. So it was left to me. But that was my last real scientific experiment. I've never studied science at university. But I did understand I had lots and lots of readers. And I thought if I could just take a few of them, and just a proportion of them, and invite them to do these experiments on the internet and work with scientists at various places, we'd have the biggest global laboratory in the world. So when I went to Gary, I had been thinking big. And he says, no, a leaf. I go, right. How am I going to engage the hearts and minds of people around the world? With a leaf. So he said, well, look, Lynn, and he quotes this to me all the time. I don't know if you know the movie Contact. There's the character, the Jodie Foster character, Ellie, and she keeps wanting to go in a wormhole and stuff. And he says to her, the other scientist, baby steps, Ellie, baby steps. And that's what Gary keeps saying to me, baby steps. This has never been tried before, where you get loads and loads of people in disparate places trying to send intention to a remote target. We got to do this one step at a time. And we also have to do it over and over again, because when you do one scientific experiment, I'm told, that is just a demonstration. It doesn't mean anything. It could be a fluke. The only thing that scientists really understand and respect is replication, doing it over and over again. So Gary says, let's start with a leaf, and let's do it a few times. So we thought, okay, let's do it in front of audiences like this. So I don't know how many of you were at our Intention conference in the spring, last March. Anybody here? We did our first pilot experiment there. And we asked everybody to choose between one of two leaves. Because as in most scientific experiments, you want to have a real experiment, you want to have the target, and you want to have a control. So we chose our leaf at random with a flip of a coin. We sent intention to one leaf. We had it on the internet. We had a live image coming in via webcam of that leaf. We played some nice little music, Jonathan Goldman's Choco Ray. And that was, by the way, a totally random process. I said to Brian, get us some music, hurry up. And he went and he got this music. And from now on, we've had hundreds of people write to us and say, who did that music? Can I buy some? Because we now use it with all our intention experiments. We asked everybody to get into a meditative state. In the intention experiment, I sort of extrapolated from a lot of intention masters and the laboratory evidence about intention, the best ways to send intention, which kinds of ways maximize intention according to the scientific evidence. So it could be a little program to see if that would work best. We sent intention. Gary had also poked 16 holes in each leaf, and this is why. In science, you've got this black art called statistical significance. And you've got to demonstrate, you have to have a lot of data points to demonstrate that something actually has significance. So we needed to have a lot of little data points to measure. Gary also has really clever equipment. He's got a thing called a CCD camera, which measures very, very faint light in outer space. Gary's been one of the first people to be able to measure this light that Pop has been able to describe and measure through a computer. Gary's been able to photograph. So he has a system where when he looks at this light, he can put a little living substance, like a leaf, into this camera and actually record the light coming out. He's had some amazing pictures. So after our experiment, I don't tell him which leaf we've done. He doesn't know. He puts both leaves into his camera, takes pictures, gets all the computerized information about the light, and actually counts it up photon by photon. The next week he calls me up really excited. He says, Lynn, you won't believe this. I said, what? He said, the leaf that you sent he said, one of the leaves, and by this time I had told him which leaf it was. The leaf we sent intention was glowing so much that the other leaf almost had a neglect effect. It had less light than normal. It's like all the light went over to this one leaf. And all those little holes were black in the control leaf, and they were light in the leaf that we'd sent intention to. So this was pretty amazing. We didn't expect a result like this. So we said, okay, let's now put it on the internet. So we tried to do this on the internet, and we were victims of our own success. We had about 10,000 people wanting to get on the net all at the same time, and our system crashed. Now, this was one thing I didn't really think about when I was thinking about intention experiments. I was thinking about how hard it was going to be to prove intention. I didn't think it was going to be hard to do this technologically, because I never thought about the problems of having 10,000 people look at the same image at the same time. That became a real issue. So we had to hire a whole new web team, and they put a whole new, we decided to run an intention experiment a month later, and we had separate pages for them. And this time we decided to have seeds. Again, pretty small target, not very interesting to me, but I realized, baby steps, baby steps. So this time we had, again, thousands of people all over the world. This time it worked. And we had the same effect. We had the same effect, light, definitely going in the same direction. We had the same power. We didn't reach statistical significance because we didn't have enough seeds. Once again, the black art's got to be over 30. So we tried doing some more leaves in different places. As Brian says, I've been all over the place. I've been to so many different countries and so many different parts of America talking about the intention experiment. And each time we've run one. And each time we've got really interesting results. And we've now run it with healers. We ran it with Eric's reconnection healers, and we got a beautiful replication of the leaf study, and a number of other places. So now we wanted to try something different, a little bit more in keeping with real life. So we were really intrigued by this study, some studies of seeds growing. A guy called Bernard Grad had done a number of studies where he'd had healers hold water and then poured it onto seeds, and he found that when the seeds were watered by healer-held water, they actually grew faster than the others and were more healthy. Then Serena Roney Dougal did something that I like to call let us pray. She decided to try this with lettuce seeds, but instead of having the healers hold the water, they actually held the seeds. And she found in a couple of experiments that the seeds in the first experiments were healthier, in the second experiments, they actually grew faster. So we decided to try that with a germination intention experiment with barley seeds. In this case, we wanted to have 4 different sets of seeds. And this is what they look like. We had 4 different sets of seeds like this. We'd have an audience choose them randomly, A, B, C, or D. I wouldn't tell the scientists back at the University of Arizona which ones we chose, and we would send intention. Now, initially, we tried to replicate the intention of Serena Roney Dougal precisely. And then we decided, as we went on, to make it more specific. Because a lot of the studies I've looked at with intention demonstrate that the more specific you are, the better it works. So we had a very specific message, 3 inches by the 4th day of growth, I think it was. My intention is to have these seeds grow at least 3 inches by the 4th day of growth, something on that order. Gary, we did our first one in Sydney, Australia. I was speaking before a group of about this size, and we sent an intention 2 seeds back at University of Arizona. So this is thousands of miles away. When Gary first looked at the statistics, he thought, there isn't much difference here. Then he suddenly realized that some of those seeds didn't sprout, and he was using the wrong statistical parameter. He needed non-parametric statistics, which are the thing you use with this kind of thing, where some of the seeds don't sprout at all. So it means that your bell curve's a little bit different than normal with statistics. When he did that, he realized, oh my goodness, we have a highly statistically significant effect. So I tried it in Rhinebeck, New York, when I spoke with Joyce Hawks. We had an effect. And very interestingly, Joyce came to me. Joyce is an amazing healer. She came after me and she said, you know, I had this image of purple, wasn't it? And I always do when I know a healing works, so I think it's worked. And it did indeed. It did indeed. Then we tried it on the internet, and it worked again. And we found the 3rd time, when we did it with a highly specific intention, it actually worked even more. Then we tried it most recently with healers. I used the Healing Touch group. I make use of my audience a lot, I must tell you. They sing for their supper when they have to hear me. So we asked them to do it, and we found they grew to double the size. Healers who are experienced intenders seem to have the greatest effect. So, what have we learned so far? You got to say, in science, not much yet. As scientists will tell you, unless you replicate it again and again, unless you try it from every angle, unless you keep groping in the dark and trying different things, it doesn't really matter, doesn't really mean anything in the giant scheme of things. But here are a few possibilities. This is what we think we found, or at least we can look at in future. It didn't seem to matter how big the group was. I kept thinking that the bigger the group, the bigger the size, the bigger the effect. Doesn't seem to be that way. A tiny little focused group of 100 people in the same room seemed to have a significant effect, and seemed to have about the same effect as thousands of people scattered around the world on the internet. And it doesn't matter how far away it is, any kind of distance. Think about it. 500 people there in Australia sending an intention to the University of Arizona and making some seeds grow faster. A little group in Rhinebeck having the same kind of effect in Arizona, all those thousands of miles away. It may well be that experienced intenders have a bigger effect. We had some cases we didn't have any kind of effect, and they always were times when we were having problems with the internet. Even though people were trying to imagine it, the lack of focus, the inability to focus may have affected it. We don't know. We have to look into it further. And it doesn't seem to require a critical mass. Mass intention doesn't seem to require lots and lots. But these are hypotheses now to be tested. We don't really know. But now we're starting to move up on our targets. So please join our intention experiments. If you're not logged on, I'm going to show you our new website in a minute. We have gone through a lot of web stuff, and we finally solved our web problems through a brilliant, brilliant Dutch webmaster. I got to tell you, I was sitting here in despair around about May, because with all of these problems with our website, I thought to myself, I'm going to let all these readers down. How can we do this? We need to do these intention experiments, but we can't seem to find a technology that will work that is cheap enough. Because when I finally did my intention experiments and it worked, the one in April, I had to spend about 3,000 pounds to use servers capacity for half an hour. And we had to rent in order to be on the safe side, we had to rent the same server company, from the same server company that, that services Pop Idol, you know, the English equivalent of American Idol for you Americans. Now, that was okay for one, but my company couldn't support that. This is, after all, stuff we're trying to do on a philanthropic basis. So I was in despair. So I thought, well, I better start taking my own medicine. So I'm going to send out an intention that I get a webmaster. And I'm really, really going to focus on this one because we really have to do this. I get a call right after that from my wonderful friend in Holland, Hus Horace. I've got a lot of friends in Holland. A couple of them are sitting right there. He says to me, I have some computer executives who might be interested in doing this for you for free. And I've got another really great web guy who runs the Secret group there in Holland, and he would really love to do this for you. And so we met with him, and Nick Hainan had the most brilliant idea. He said, let's run these on a social network, like a, you know, Facebook or something like that. But there's a wonderful social network called Ning, which means love in Chinese. And they've set this up so it's really virtually for free. They have 500 linked servers, many more than we need. And when we called them about it, they loved it. They did a bit of tweaking, and it worked. And it enabled us to have people talking at the same time, all at the same time. So he solved the problem. It cost us a grand total of £19 a month to do this. And we were able to do our intention experiments. So I like to think that's the power of intention. But what we're planning now, we've got a lot of other plans. Dr. Schwartz and I are working on creating this ecosphere, which is going to be a little mini world. And we might try doing things like slightly raising the temperature and seeing if we can lower it with our thoughts. We can try, once we have an ecosphere, we can try all sorts of things. We want to try purifying water. I've been speaking with Deepak Chopra's Alliance for New Humanity. They're very interested in, they monitor certain hot spots around the world, and they're very interested in us trying some real life thing of sending intention to lower the level of violent activity. So we can try that. And I've been speaking with the Institute of Noetic Sciences about doing our first human experiment. I approach it cautiously because you gotta say, we don't know if it's gonna have, you know, a positive effect. I don't know. I can't guarantee that. So we need to test this very gingerly. You know, the effect of thousands of people sending intention to a single human. You know, I just want to make sure we don't blow the person's head off. So we've got to test all of this, but it's in the works, so please, please be part of it. I want to leave you with a few other thoughts, too. Just about the real implications of some of this, not only on yourself and your own life and your own healing, but you in relation to the rest of the planet. You know, if we are part of this giant whole and this vast ecosphere, and if all of this is available, all this information available to us at every moment from the field, if we're sending and receiving, and we're picking up all the time, if we're delocalized, and we have all this information, then our human potential, as it now exists, is just a glimmer of what it could be. If we're not separate or in competition, then in every aspect of our life, we don't win or lose. We can cooperate. We can create businesses that cooperate. We can look beyond time or space. We have to redefine it. We have to start honoring intuition and understanding that that's an information source every good as our senses. We have to understand and redefine what death is and how we die. I'm fascinated by the work by Pim von Lommel, who was a cardiologist, who was tracking near-death experience. And he is demonstrating that consciousness is far from that computer that it's now described as, and it doesn't turn off at the moment of death. I'm fascinated by information about coma victims, demonstrating that they are fully conscious of what's going on in some level, all during their coma. It redefines our idea and our understanding of consciousness. But we need another way to be. We have to change the way that we think of ourselves in relation to the world. What's me? What's not me? We have to change how we interact with others. We have to change how we carry out our work. We have to change how we bring up our children. We have to change how we approach our death. Basically, we have to change the whole thing. We are trying to take and help a little way towards that with some of the activities we do, and I'm going to tell you about the Field Foundation in a minute. One of the things we're trying to do is to just help people interact and meet each other, because this is a learning process for all of us. We've been brought up in better living through chemistry, and to try to understand how to do this is a radical redefinition of our paradigm. We are creating groups on our website, and I'll show you that in a minute. And they're doing it all by themselves. This is really great, because we've had this platform, and we don't really have to do anything. The groups are forming themselves. We provide weekly e-news, but the groups themselves, as I say, are discussing and meeting personally and on the internet. We also started to try something called Intention of the Week, and I'll show you that in a minute. I did this again out of despair, because I did it because there was a guy called Don Berry, who was a Vietnam vet. In the middle of our internet troubles, he contacted me and he said, you know, I can't move my spine. I'm a pretty good intention experiment because I've got all this medical evidence. Would you just put me on the site and let people send intention to me? So I thought, right, I can't run big experiments. Let's do this. So we just told everybody about it. And on their own back, the readers started to create times in the week where they would start sending Don intention. And Don kept a diary, and he started feeling a bit better. So then I thought, well, and other people then started sending in their loved ones and things. So I thought, well, hey, we could just put an intention of the week on. Now, this isn't science, but it's a little bit like a cyber prayer group. So people started sending in premature babies and people with cancer and runaway teenagers, and we've had some interesting results. The runaway teenager, it was the angriest kid you ever want to see. I actually got a lot of flack for putting her picture on the website, because I put the picture on every time. I'll show you. We put a little intention of the week. There's a little preemie. And we just put that on all the time, and we tell people what the intention is and what to do about it. And we, at a certain time every Saturday, it's 5 p.m. GMT, so it's 6 p.m. here, that's 10 a.m. Pacific time, 1 p.m. East Coast time, 3 a.m. I'm afraid in Australia. They lose. Somebody has to have the 3 a.m. slot, I'm afraid. And everybody sends intention for 10 minutes. Our runaway teenager, I've been writing to some people to see if they've felt better. Some people have said yes, some people have said no change. The runaway teenager said, her mother said, she had run away, she was with an angry crowd, and she said it was a miracle. 3 weeks later, she came back. They've started talking, they've started discussing her problems, she's starting to resolve her issues with her mother, and by the look of it too, her Facebook entry, which was this really angry entry, is now pink. So I don't know whether we did anything to do with that. It's not scientific, we can't prove it, but it's just a, you know, it's a nice focal group. So this is the Intention Experiment site now, and this is the Intention Experiment community. And as I say, what's happening is groups are meeting in other groups. You know, we have a group that meets and talks about quantum holograms, and we've got a group that talks about other things and sends all kinds of intention. And they're pretty much doing it themselves, and ours is we're just providing the platform. And we've got the same thing with Living the Field. We've got we changed this. We made this a different platform because it's got a slightly different purpose in that it's helping people to live holistically. So please go onto the sites. Again, people are talking with each other. They're looking at human potential and how to extend it. They're looking at how to bring these ideas into their lives with the field. And now I want to tell you about our little pet project. This grew up actually by accident. I was invited when I was in Holland, one of my innumerable times, to come speak before a couple of, about 16 managers in business. And I was a little scared about it because I've never actually talked to anybody in business about some of these concepts. And I didn't know what to do, and I didn't really, I thought I was just having dinner with them, and they told me about 2 minutes before, well, now you're going to give a half-hour talk. Oh, well, okay. So I just stood up and I harangued them a little bit. And I just started talking about living in unity and talked about, you know, one of the big problems we have is that most global change or most global corporate responsibility is real window dressing. You know, it's let's go plunder oil, but we'll give a little bit of medicine to the natives kind of thing and look good on our website. Or let's just do a little bit of green something while we do something that really basically is horrible for the planet. Or let's be McDonald's and poison everybody, but do it in recycled boxes. So I thought, right, you know, if it isn't, I started talking to these people about, well, what are you doing? Like there was a lady from KLM, and I said, well, what are you doing to do some alternate, you know, planes pollute the planet more than anything else. They're responsible for global warming in the main. So what are you doing about an alternative energy source? Are you all meeting together and coming up with zero-point energy? You know, what are you doing? And we talked about other places, you know, leadership and unity, redefining how you run a company from the inside, and also redefining your mission statement. If it isn't good for the planet, why are you doing it? You know, if it isn't promoting unity in the world, why are you doing it? And can you do something else? And a woman there was from McDonald's, and she said, well, we can't do organic stuff. And I said, why not? You know, with all the money you've got, why not? Why can't you redefine your paradigm? So we had that, and to my astonishment, they didn't go away pissed off at me. We had another meeting a couple of months later, and more than double the number of people came back. So then we started thinking, well, maybe we should do something more. And this is what they started talking about. Let's have a foundation. So then we started thinking about, well, how can we do this? What do we really want to do with this foundation? And what we thought about ultimately is we want to support the scientists who are really trying to do things that change our world. I mean, most scientists that I've met over these past years of researching these two books beg on their hands and knees for the money to do things that change our world. They beg on their hands and knees. So one of the thoughts we had was to corral businesses through a financial incentive to start behaving themselves. And we also started thinking about methods and ways of fundraising to support those scientists who are doing research that are really going to transform our world. One of those scientists is a Russian that we are working with now, and we've just spoken to some people yesterday with wonderful, exciting ideas. They've worked with these people for years who have developed a very simple way to give water to the planet and to power vehicles through water. Power vehicles through water. They have solved the carbon problem. They just need some money. They need protection. They need exposure. So this is what we are hoping we will be doing with it. This is in its very early stage. It's just discussed. We're just discussing things now. But we have a CEO of it. We're the figureheads. We have a CEO, and we're going to do this. We're going to do this. So please keep involved with us and watch this space. This is what we'd like to put a lot of our energy. And we're hoping in the spring to run our first conference with the Field Foundation, to invite some of these scientists to present to you some of the things that will happen in your world. I also want to let you know, and I'll be talking about this later, that we have a course that might be interesting to you that provides all the elements of how to bring this into your life, about extended human potential, about bringing the field into work with children, about understanding the new science and the philosophy of it. And please be aware and please look at it. We have a special offer on today. It's half price. So please look at it in the break. I don't know if any of you watch Heroes, but my children do. My two daughters are addicted to it. So we watch it every Wednesday. And they've been coming up with some incredible catchphrases. And one of the big phrases now is save the cheerleader, save the world. And I thought that was actually a wonderful catchphrase for us, because now we have to understand ourselves in totality and truly understand that if we save and we understand and redefine ourselves, we can begin to change the world. Thank you very much.